We look forward to the Friday edition of The Next Right Thing. Adam and I are super excited to talk about Saint Francis of Assisi. Oh, how we love this great saint. And there's so much we can learn from him. But we also want to share with our listeners that tomorrow on The Spirit World, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, we're going to be talking all about the Rosary in depth. I know we covered it yesterday, Adam, and I thought we did a really good job. But on The Spirit World, we'll be able to take calls, which is fabulous, about the Rosary, and just really keep up the momentum about praying the Rosary during the month of October, during Rosary Month. But today we're talking about Saint Francis of Assisi on this great feast day. We both have a lot to say about this great saint and about the stigmata and other saints that absolutely looked up to him, like Padre Pio and Blessed Carlo Acutis and others. So there's so much to say, not enough time to do it. So why don't you begin, Adam, and we'll just go from there.
Sure, Deb. So I know a lot of people have heard of Saint Francis. They associate him with the blessing of the animals and with nature. But there's a lot more to say, and I'll briefly go through his life for the people that don't know. Just the highlights, because a lot of people don't know that. We do, because we've heard it before, but lots of our listeners don't. So Saint Francis, he was born in 1181, died in 1226. He started out a wealthy, indulgent, handsome, witty young man who loved fine clothing. He loved the women.
Privileged.
He liked to party.
Yeah, very privileged.
Yeah, wealthy merchant family. He had, in a worldly sense, he basically was born into it, okay? And he had the gift of being handsome and witty. He was bright. So everything was, in a worldly sense, really going his way in his youth. And he had kind of a wake-up moment where he woke up to the reality of the poor around him and the fact that these humans also were valuable and their lives had meaning also. And it really struck him deeply. It was an encounter with a beggar that really started to give him an insight that there was a little bit more to things. Okay, that was the beginning of his conversion. So he had a few formative experiences that were kind of intense. So when he was only 21, and I guess that's not uncommon for soldiers, he joined a military expedition. He was taken captive, and he was a prisoner for a year, and he was sick during that time. It was a bad year in his life. He was only 21 years old. That really made an impact on him, and it led to a lot of kind of soul searching. When he was 24, just a few years later, he decides to enlist in a different army. And he strikes out. He's going to travel to this city where he can sign up, and he's going to go fight in another conflict. And before he gets there and he's able to sign up, he has a vision, and he returns home to Assisi. And at this point, he loses all interest in his worldly life. So he starts praying in chapels, particularly one that was run down and in a state of disrepair. And there's this famous moment that's always recreated in films about him, where he's kind of in a religious ecstasy, kind of a state of rapture with God in his prayer. And he hears God say in his heart, maybe he heard it out loud, we don't know, Francis, Francis, go and repair my church, which, as you can see, is falling into ruins. So he initially thinks God literally means the church he's sitting in, which was a church that was in ruins. And so he sells some of his dad's goods, and he donates the money to that church, and he starts, painting and scrubbing and sweeping, because he thought it was literally about that church. But God was talking about the whole church. So Dad doesn't like this very much. He's kind of fed up with Francis. When Francis starts selling his silk and his goods to give money to this church, there's a big conflict. And so Francis renounces everything. At that point, he's kind of done with the wealth. He renounces his father formally. He, some of the stories, we don't know if this part's true. He stripped naked before the bishop, took off all of his fine clothing. Not that he wanted to be naked, but he wanted to take all the signs of wealth away. And the bishop then took the bishop's cloak and wrapped it around him. And that was his way of really quite literally renouncing the world. And he became a beggar. he started nursing lepers at the leper colonies near Assisi. He started serving the poor and preaching to people. So he's 28 now, and he's traveling around. His father's basically, given up on him. He's given up on the world, but he's moving into God. And he starts attracting followers. He's got 11 followers, and they're living with him in the leper colony, and they're attending to the poor people that are just cast aside by the world, and they're right there with them. So he's got 11 followers, and he says, well, we need some kind of structure here. So he writes a rule, basically a primitive rule, meaning a simple rule for his followers to live by and for their group. And soon, we can't get into all the details, there's not time, the Pope admits them. And in 1210, the Franciscan order is founded. And the Pope accepts the charism, meaning kind of the spiritual direction or inspiration that Francis had, which was to truly renounce wealth in the world and truly serve all humans, not just the privileged.
Right. Well, and I just want our listeners to connect the dots. Remember, my word for the year is connection. So, folks, connect the dots. So you got Blessed Carlo Acutis, who was a boy that was of privilege, and he had the means to live a really, really charmed life, and in northern Italy, and when he was also born in London, but he was in northern Italy. He wanted to be buried in Assisi, which is where he's laid out in Assisi. Why? Because he was so close to Saint Francis of Assisi. So you see the connection there. And then let's also talk about when he died. He sent messages back from heaven to his mother and to other family relatives that he attained a high place in heaven, same as Saint Francis of Assisi. See the connection? There's also a connection between Padre Pio and Saint Francis of Assisi. I mean, there's so many. The beauty of our faith is, I think, when we spend the time to really put the puzzle pieces together and connect all those spiritual dots, it starts to form this tapestry emerges that is just amazing. And you're like, okay, I get it, Lord. I see how all these characters, all these players came on the scene at just the right time. And that's why Saint Francis of Assisi is such a loved saint. I mean, everybody loves him. I mean, you can even talk, as a matter of fact, a lot of people that aren't Catholic, Protestant preachers, they reference Saint Francis of Assisi.
Yeah. And, in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, he was so respected by the Muslims that when the Christians were driven out of the Holy Land, the Franciscans were the only religious order that the Muslims allowed to stay because they had inspired so much respect. Mm-hmm. He had inspired so much respect for his genuine love and care of anybody and his renouncing of the world that the Franciscans still had the patrimony of being the custodians of the Holy Land. Mm-hmm. He inspired a lot of people.
Yeah, and real quickly, I just want to share, I talk a lot about my uncle. He was a wonderful priest. He still is a priest. A priest is forever, but he passed, and he was a third order. He was a diocesan priest, but a third order Franciscan. And he was a strong follower of Saint Francis of Assisi, so much so that he named his pets Francesco and Claire. I mean, it goes on and on. But the Franciscan spirituality, a lot of people, they may not understand it, and they actually sometimes even will criticize it, right? Thinking it's maybe too weak or too pastoral. It's so beautiful. You talked about the charisms and the gifts that these different orders bring to the world. If folks would just take the time to see the goodness of all these different orders, they would understand how they were essential for the building up of the kingdom. Yeah.
So there's two religious visions that he had that are probably worth mentioning because they're quite interesting. One was, and his followers recorded these, and as he recounted to them later about them. One was he was meditating and praying, and he was shown an empty throne with a crown sitting on it. Nobody sitting on the throne, didn't know what it was. And he heard a voice say it was either an angel or it was God. I don't think it's completely clear. Basically say, Francis, do you know whose throne this is? And he's like, well, no, of course I don't. And the voice said, this is Satan's throne. This will be your place in heaven after you die. And it links to an idea that I don't think it's ever been like a formal thing, but one of the things that theologians have mused about in some of the private revelation, and remember, we're talking about private revelation here. This was a personal experience he had. But one of the ideas is that for those of us that attain heaven, we are taking the places of the angels that fell. So the third of the angels that fell, God is completing what was lost and disordered after the trial of this life. And so Francis received that particular vision as a private revelation that kind of goes along with that idea. The other big one, and this is what a lot of people hear about, is in 1224, when he was 43 years old, he had a vision of a seraphim, which is an angel with a number of wings that cover their feet, that cover their face, and that they fly with. So 6 wings, which is probably the number has a particular meaning, certainly does have a particular meaning. But he's seen this seraphim on a cross, and he receives the stigmata. These beams of light hit him, and he receives, the pain, and he receives the wounds of Christ. He's the first saint that we're sure received the stigmata. Paul may have, because there's some scripture references where Paul references bearing the wounds of Christ in his body, but we're not sure that he had the stigmata exactly. But with Francis, we are.
There's a lot of mystery also about his life, but we know enough about him. I was there in Assisi. Wow, I could have lived there. It was so beautiful. When my husband and I landed in Assisi, we didn't want to leave. My husband turned to me and he goes, "Don't you feel like you're home?" I said, "Yes." So I can see why Blessed Carlo Acutis wanted to be buried there. I absolutely see it. The cobblestone streets, it's so beautiful, so peaceful. It's like I don't know. It just feels like it's snapped out of a portion of time that just never moved forward. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've been to Assisi a few times, and yeah, it's like you're walking through a set of a movie of a medieval times. It's just amazing. And if people ever go there, the robe that Saint Francis wore is still there. It's of course behind glass; you can't touch it, but yeah, it's still there. All this time later, with all the patches that he sewed into it, and it's frayed and weathered and stained and worn out. But boy, yeah, being in Assisi is something. I had a meal once in one of the restaurants kind of on the side of the city there overlooking the valley. And Italy is just a beautiful place. Yep,
absolutely. We really, if you can afford to go there and make a pilgrimage, it's definitely worth it. But you're going to talk about the stigmata. Don't let me forget that I have to share, because as you were talking, I was thinking about this beautiful indoor statue that I have that was gifted to me. But I'll share that if we have some time. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so St. Francis, the big things in his life was giving up the world, giving up wealth. He lived in absolute poverty, relied on others to feed him, which Franciscans still do, at least some of them to this day. They rely on others for their sustenance, and serving the poor. But he also was really big on fasting. In fact, he was really into fasting. And later in his life, in some of the writings, that his followers wrote down, he said, maybe I kind of took it too far with the fasting, because he had really pushed his body hard in terms of all the mortification that he did. And it could be that was perhaps related to him receiving the stigmata, because he had kind of sought to, I don't want to presume to get into his mind, but he had sought to kind of embody that yearning for heaven and the prayer that comes, in fasting, the kind of type of prayer that comes in fasting. Of course, the exemplar of this is Jesus in the desert for 40 days, which is a very long time to fast. I know people that have done that. And it's intense, and you should have medical supervision, because you can damage your stomach. But he was doing things like that on a regular basis. And so he was pushing hard to emulate the life of Christ as much as possible. And so along the way, for whatever reason, at age 43, he received these wounds. He was very shy about it and didn't want people to know about it because he felt self-conscious,
Same way Padre Pio felt.
Yeah. But of course, people noticed, and it was recorded in some of the paintings of him, and his followers wrote descriptions of it. But so he's the first one that we're sure bore those wounds, which, if you think of it in terms of God pointing to somebody out of all of history, that's a signpost there in history saying, hey, pay attention to this person. Right. There's something important about this person's life that I want you to remember, because here's something notable that doesn't happen all the time, and you're going to remember this.
And his extreme love for creation, love of animals. I mean, that's why, the blessing of the pets and all that goes along. And people have garden statues of Saint Francis of Assisi, and that's beautiful. I mean, our statues and how we remember these great saints is fabulous. But let's go deeper than that. Don't just make it something like a great ornament that you put up and then you say, oh, that's wonderful. I mean, have it blessed and really make it a time to pray your rosary out at that garden where you have that statue or something of that nature. If I may say this quickly, as you were speaking, it just dawned on me. I mean, honestly, I have it in my home, and it's funny because I have so many spiritual reminders, holy reminders all around the house that it's hard for me to just zero in on one. But I have a pretty big and very heavy copper, beautiful statue of Saint Francis of Assisi, with a fountain and has animals around him, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And it was given to me when I graduated with my graduate degree in theology. My husband threw me a party, and all of my neighbors got together. They had no idea what to give me, and so they gave me this beautiful statue of St. Francis of Assisi, indoor statue, and they had it blessed. And I remember when they wheeled it in, because it was that heavy, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is the most gorgeous. And it was so just extraordinary and just beautiful, and it added to any decor. And it sits in our family room. And I oftentimes, when I'm feeling like just strange about the world, I'll glance over at that statue, and it's like, okay, I get it, St. Francis. I get what you were trying to tell us, shut out the world and just really go into God's creation and understand God better and go deeper with God. And I get it. Now, maybe he did take it too far, but it spiritually benefited him. He received many spiritual gifts, so it worked for his journey. But it is important for us to kind of refocus, and I think St. Francis does that so beautifully. Make me a channel of your peace. This, the whole theme of St. Francis, this peace theme, I think we need it now more than ever.
Yeah. And, I would say my challenge for us on this day, when you have time, is go and read the Rule of St. Francis, because that will give you a deeper sense of how he saw life, how he saw Christianity, a model of life from his perspective. Now, it's a religious life, so it's not, fit for somebody who's going to be living in the world and, dealing with a family and all the challenges that come with living in the world. That's fine. But you can take some of that into your life. Mm-hmm. And by studying the Rule of St. Francis, you're going to get closer to him than just, a phrase or a few things that you pick up here or there. Mm-hmm. I wanted to, one final thing, if I could share a quote from him, Deb.
Oh, good.
Very brief.
Not the standard one, preach the gospel, always use words if necessary, because it's been attributed to him, but it really wasn't, probably he didn't actually say it, but go ahead.
Here it is.
Okay.
Your God is of your flesh. He lives in your nearest neighbor, in every man.
Oh, good one. Good one.
Thank you for listening to The Next Right Thing with angel specialist Debbie Georgianni and religious demonologist Adam Bly. Debbie and Adam are daily contributors to the live radio program Morning Joy, hosted by Keith Downey every weekday on the Guadalupe Radio Network. For more authentic Catholic content, go to grnonline.com/joy.